Hello and welcome to Letters Home, a story of a World War II B-17 pilot from Lowell, Michigan, in his own words. And he just so happens to be my grandpa. I'm your host, Annie Whitlock, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, my dad, Mitch McMahon, my aunt, Lori McMahon Summerfield, and Dale Croft from the Lowell Historical Museum.
In each episode of Letters Home, we're going to dive into letters written by my dad during his time in World War II that he sent to his parents, siblings, and friends back home in Lowell, Michigan. We'll be reading his own words and giving some context as to what was happening in the world and in Lowell at the time he wrote these.
In this episode, we read a description of Dad's base in Thurleigh and some letters he wrote to his siblings. We also get information about one of Dad's first missions.
Yeah, we're getting into the missions now. We're going to start today, though, with snippets of letters that Bruce wrote to his siblings and his siblings-in-law. We have a letter that he wrote to his three siblings, Bern, his older brother, Marion, his older sister, and her husband, Ed, and Roger, his older brother, and Roger's wife, Veda. On our last episode, we talked about how Frank and Lotta lived on 112 Hudson Street. Well, now that Bruce is writing these letters to his siblings, I can now see their addresses, and it seems like Bruce's, the entire family seemed to live on Hudson Street, because the Burns address was 325 Hudson, Ed and Marion was 123 Hudson, and Roger and Veda's letter also went to 112 Hudson. The same address as Frank and Lotta, but they weren't living together, right? I'm pretty sure no. I mean, none of the letters indicate that they were living together. I don't know.
Again,
maybe they got Roger and Veda's mail,
a Gail
or vice
question.
versa.
Gail will know the answer to that, I'm sure. Definitely.
Okay, yeah, we have to reach out to Gail for sure. I'm reading Veda and Gail.
There we go.
Yeah. So anyway, it was interesting to see all these addresses on Hudson Street here. So I don't know. I should look up those, where those addresses are now. You said that maybe one of them was not there anymore.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of them aren't there anymore. One is just north of Rothger's funeral home.
Okay.
That house was torn down. And then there's another one closer to the post office on the corner that was torn down.
It's the AT&T building right behind the museum.
Correct.
Okay. Well, if any listeners live at these houses, these addresses are near, let us know. But we're going to kind of read little excerpts from three different letters to kind of piece this together. Because you'll see the letters he writes to his siblings are definitely a different tone, which is kind of cool. So we're going to start with an excerpt of the letter to Roger and Veda in his own words.
Sunday night, September 26, 1943. Dear Raj and Veda, combat is strictly big league over here. Plenty of enemy action, and they're really serious about it, to put it mildly. It's a cinch I'll have plenty of material for my grandchildren on cold winter evenings. Wait a minute. You got to have children first, don't you? Well, let's see. Let's make it my nephews and nieces. Speaking of nephews, tell little Raj that machine guns don't go ack, ack, ack when they're fired at you. You can't hear them. All you see is pretty lights winking at you from the enemy's wings.
When I read that quote at the beginning of this letter, I laughed out loud. Plenty of material for his grandchildren on cold winter evenings. It is a cold winter evening. I am his grandchild reading stories that he's written about the war.
Isn't that amazing?
So he nailed it.
Yeah.
Divine intervention there, I believe.
He nailed it. If only he knew just how much material his war stories were giving his grandchildren. He'd be shocked.
His guesses about the war quite often overly optimistic, but that time he had
that one I was like, whoa, okay. This letter also features Bruce asking Veda to buy all of his nieces and nephews Christmas presents from him, and he kind of gives her some props for being the one in the family that takes care of everything. I got that impression. He was sort of like, I know you've been doing this since you've been in the family, but I need you to buy all my nieces and nephews Christmas presents. Oh, and so the next excerpt is from Bruce's letter to Bern, his brother, and I think I have a mystery solved here because the address says Bern McMahon, whatever, but the letter says, Dear Barney. So I'm pretty sure Barney is a nickname for Bern. I'm guessing it is.
Yeah, makes sense.
So Barney's not probably another person. I think that's his nickname for Bern.
Yeah. And that's Brother Mike about it.
I was going to say, yeah.
I mean, that's got to be right.
Yeah, that's
Anyway.
cool.
Holy cousin Pat.
Very cool. Very cool.
So we'll see. So anyway, here's a part of Barney's letter in his own words.
How well I remember daubing on your house. Remember how you set up the radio so I could hear the World Series? Guess maybe I'll miss hearing them this year. Someday I hope to fly over my old stomping grounds at MP. Wonder what they do with a 17 in the pattern.
I learned that in 1943, the New York Yankees played the St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series that year. So that's the series that Bruce might be missing out on. But both teams had very depleted rosters because of the war. That's what I learned. And it was a repeat. They had played each other the year before in the series, so it was a rematch. That's not going to be our last sports reference of this episode. I really got into studying war-depleted sports rosters in this particular rabbit hole. And he wants to fly over MP, Mount Pleasant. Yay! Fire up chips.
All of us.
Finally, we end with a funny excerpt from the end of a letter to Ed and Marion, in his own words.
Say, Ed, I heard of a new one the other night. A blockbuster. 2 jugs of scotch, 1 of gin, 1 of port wine, filled with lemon soda. Okay, so it does sound like a recipe for varnish. They do drink them over here. So long for now. Love, Brother JB.
He tends to write Ed about cocktails a lot. Should I try to make this one? Just like I brought the maple sugar and the divinity in.
Yeah,
I'll try to make this one up, and we'll. Oh no, I probably
and
can't bring it
gin.
into the high school
Yeah,
to.
the
have to wait
principal
until
will
after.
walk in right
Probably
during that.
frowned upon to be sipping varnish liquor at 3 p.m. at a school, but
Might use that for a celebration drink when we get done with all the podcasts.
okay,
Yeah,
a blockbuster. That sounds disgusting, to be honest with you. Just read it, like when you read the ingredients. I don't know what port wine is, but it doesn't
Like a
sound
sherry kind of
Scotch isn't my favorite.
No, gin also.
No.
And
Ugh.
gross. And it's 2 jugs of scotch. Like what? He can't literally mean a jug. He has to mean like a shot or something, right? Like a jug.
A bottle?
2
Maybe a
jugs
bottle?
of scotch. Anyway. All right. Well,
Oh, jugs. Okay. All right. I see.
we have one more family letter this time to Frank and Lotta, the parents, about his time sightseeing in London, written on September 24th, in his own words.
Dear Mother and Dad, just time for a note, but just know you'll be hearing from me more or less regularly. Sitting here, I can see a very beautiful sunset, although it does have streaks of fall coloring in it. It is getting on into autumn. Our autumn here will probably be quite similar to those at home, and winter won't be quite as severe. Last year it was mostly rain and nasty weather with very little snow. I was in London visiting a few days ago, really saw the town proper. This time I kind of made a cook's tour of all the famous places. Tower of London, Esther Square, Parliament Buildings, Big Ben, and also saw a couple of good shows. Stage shows, not cinemas. It was really quite interesting to browse around in the musty old London British Museum. Most of the young stuff in the exhibits is around 200 years old. Of course, there's a lot of old pieces, too. This cape was worn by Louis XIV on his wedding night, and these earrings were worn by Princess Eugenie when she was beheaded, etc., etc., etc. There's also evidence of the Blitz on all sides of you. It can be imagined what it must have been like when every night the subways were full of people trying to sleep. Oh yes, I saw him change the guard at St. James Palace. Although some of its former pomp is lost some of its former pomp, it's still mighty impressive. Buckingham Palace is another interesting place. Gotta say so long for a while. God bless you and keep you. Your loving son, J. Bruce.
Yeah, so we got to do some sightseeing around London during his time. All right, well, it is time for our segment now where we talk about what was going on in the world and in Lowell when Bruce wrote these letters. Bruce wrote a very long letter on September 20th, 1943. That is definitely in his typical descriptive style. But he also talks about some world news and local items in this letter. So we're going to read the entire letter and stop every so often to kind of fill in the gaps. So we'll start at the beginning. And I mean, the very, very top of this letter has another food stain. I keep feeling like that's my role to bring up the food stains. And is a note by it that says, circled, it says, some of my week's ration of English chocolate. So he's getting those smudges on the letter. So remember, you can see all of the letters at the Lowell Historical Museum website. So, you know, you get the full experience of his handwriting and his food stains and all that good stuff. All right, in his own words.
Monday, September 20th, 1943. Dear Mother and Dad, observations as I sit here thinking of you and home. Let's say the room I'm writing in is about 20 by 60 with 6 beds on either side. Between each there's a desk, and on it is a table lamp with paper shade. It's about 9:30, so all the blackout blinds are up and the only light is from the lamp on a desk. At the foot of my bed stands a chest of drawers, and on this a mirror with a warm spot in the lower right-hand corner. Outside, you can hear the roar of engines as some of my buddies take off and others come in for the night. Occasionally, there's a lull, and then it seems very quiet. Glimmer, a black water spaniel belonging to a fellow across the room, just got up and stretched himself, preparatory to scratching his silky black neck, which has been attacked by some species of cootie. On my bed is an issue of Stars and Stripes, a daily American newspaper for servicemen, and the latest issue of Yank. On the table here in front of me is a package of Philip Morris, my pipe, and a pack of Granger. Oh yes, I filled my pen from a bottle of ink. Guess it's a little different color. My bed is a 3/4 bed with a good mattress. It's a corner bed, and there are 2 windows directly at the head. The sheets are changed once a week, but the pillow is only a hard roll, about a foot long and 10 inches in diameter. Now, to skip to nothing specific, but a lot in common. Our club, our mess hall, and the club are in the same building. It's a 1-story building with a green painted brick outside and red cement floors inside. There's one room which has a bar, 2 ping pong tables, a pool table, and a dart target hanging on the wall. The walls are cream with paintings of our different squadron insignias in large colored emblems. You go through a large archway into a reading room with rugs, comfort chairs, and a shortwave radio. The fellows sit around in here and smoke and read the various British newspapers. When the American shortwave program goes on, you can see the newspapers go down and into various laps, and faraway look comes into their eyes. Not a lonesome look, mind you, but more or less an attitude of retrospective. At 9 every night, they open up a snack bar, and they have meat or cheese sandwiches, coffee, bread, and butter pickles, apple butter, and jam. This is all great and is nice before going to bed. It's about a 2-block walk from the club to the barracks, and so it's just a nice breath of fresh air before I turn in. Our squadron area is down on the line and is located about half a mile from the club. Tomorrow I'm going to get a bike, and it'll sure save shoe leather.
I just love that whole description. You can really picture it, right?
Yeah.
He does such a good job of that. Since Bruce mentions his squadron insignias painted on the walls, I think this is a good time to explain what squadron and bomb group he's in. So, Dale, what can you tell us about the 368th Squadron?
Well, the
308th.
The 306th Bombardment Group was the first operational bombardment group that flew B-17 Flying Fortress bombers in the 8th Bomber Command. It was stationed as RAF Thurleigh, England, from September 6, 1942 until December 25, 1945, the longest tenure at one station for any one 8th Army force group. The 306 bombardment was nicknamed the Reich Wreckers. It led the first daylight bombing mission flown by the American forces over Germany on January 27, 1943. It was the first 8th Air Force bomb group to complete 300 missions, was the longest serving bomb group in the 8th Air Force, and was also the inspiration for the 1949 movie 12 O'Clock High, starring Gregory Peck. From 1942 to 1944, the B-17 stationed here flew 10,000 sorties, dropping 23,000 tons of explosives in a variety of targets in Europe, including railroad facilities, submarine pens, oil plants, and aircraft factories. During this time, they lost 177 aircraft, with 483 airmen killed in action, 305 missing in action, 145 were wounded in action, and 884 were captured as prisoners of war, of which, this is kind of neat, 108 managed to escape and return to Thurleigh. So that was kind of cool.
Wow.
Major Harris Smith of the 423rd received the Medal of Honor on May 1st, 1943. And it tweaked my interest, so I had to find out how he won it, and I have to share how he did it because it's incredible. The target of the mission was the U-boat pens at St. Nazaire, France on the Bay of Biscay. St. Nazaire was heavily defended by anti-aircraft guns. It was nicknamed Flak City by the airmen. Sergeant Smith's bomber was hit, rupturing a fuel tank, igniting a massive fire in the center of the fuselage. The damage was severe, knocking out communications and compromising the fuselage's integrity. Smith's ball turret lost post. He was a ball turret gunner. And he scrambled out to assist the other crew members. 3 crew members bailed out while Smith tended to 2 others who were seriously wounded. In between helping his wounded comrades, Smith also manned the 50 caliber machine guns and fought the raging fire.
Oh my gosh.
The heat with the fire was so intense that it began to melt the metal in the fuselage, threatening to break the plane in half. For nearly 90 minutes, Smith alternated between shooting and attacking fighters, tending to the wounded, and fighting the fire.
Oh my God.
Wow.
90
Unbelievable.
minutes?
That's crazy.
Wow.
To starve the fuel of fire, he threw burning debris and exploding ammunition through the large holes that the fire had melted in the fuselage. After the fire extinguishers were exhausted, Smith finally managed to put the fire out, in part by urinating on it.
Oh my gosh.
Smith's bomber reached England and landed at the first available airfield, where it broke in half at touchdown.
Wow.
It had been hit with more than 3,500 bullets and pieces of shrapnel.
Oh.
The 3 crew members who bailed out were not seen again and were presumed lost at sea. But Smith's efforts undoubtedly saved the lives of 6 others aboard the aircraft. Smith, now, that's how he won the Medal of Honor. So a week later, Smith was assigned to KP duty the week that he was awarded the Medal of Honor as punishment for arriving late for a briefing.
He did all that, and they gave him.
I know. He wins the Medal of Honor, and he has to have KP because he missed it. Smith flew 4 more combat missions after earning the Medal of Honor, but was then grounded as a result of PTSD and was reassigned to non-combat clerical work.
Will you tell me his first name? Tell me his name again.
Maynard Harrison
Maynard.
Smith
Maynard.
was the
Maynard
first Medal of
Harrison
Honor winner.
Wow.
When I read that story, I said, I got to share
deserving.
this.
Wow,
'cause it's
that's
incredible.
insane.
Oh, there's a movie there.
Oh.
There's a movie
Yeah,
right
I
there.
know.
Absolutely.
So Bruce won the Distinguished Service Cross, Air Medal, and Bronze Star. And he was Distinguished Service Cross. There was only 7 members out of 220 that won that award. He also won the Air Medal. Out of 122,000 people that had in the force, 14,000 won the Air Medal. So, and he won a Bronze Star, of which only 65 out of 3,000 people had earned.
wow.
Now, the 306 is comprised of 4 squadrons. There was a 376 called the Clay Pigeons, the 368, which is Bruce's, which was called the Eager Beavers. The 369th was called the Fightin' Bitin'. And the 423rd, which Maynard was part of, was called the Grim Reapers. The 306 Bombardment Group, like all the other units, used tail codes. That was interesting because looking at the planes, you would see on the tail letters. I've often wondered what
what
were
is
those.
that?
So I said, I got to put that in here. So the 306 Bombardment Group used a tail code, was a triangle H, which was comprised of a white capital H centered on a black triangle painted on the vertical fin above the serial number on the plane. So when you look at these pictures now,
I've seen
you
it,
see
yeah.
that big H. That's a 306.
Okay, so that's his squadron.
Now,
Or his bomb group.
each squadron also had tail codes. So the 367th had GY on the tail. Bruce's 368 had BO, capital BO. 369th had WW, and the 423rd had RD. The use of tail codes extended beyond the 306 Bombardment Group, becoming a standard practice within the United States Army Air Force during World War II to help manage and track aircraft with all the flying, everything going on. The 306 Bombardment Group Museum, which we talked about last week, which Lori and
We want to go see
Annie
it.
are definitely going to go.
I'm working on
if
it.
they can get Dad to go with it.
I'm working on it.
As a memorial to the airmen who served in the group. And I found their website on there that's pretty cool. It's in an old barracks.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So
I know.
it's
I want to go.
You got to go.
It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, and it's got pictures on the inside. It looks really cool if you go.
I'm going to email the
So-
travel agent today.
So, the 306, pretty amazing.
Yeah. It's
Pretty
really, really
amazing.
cool. And he's one of the Eager Beavers. I'd always
Yeah,
seen
Eager
that and
Beavers.
go like, what does
Yeah.
that even mean? Is that just something funny that he came up with? But no, it's the name of his squadron.
Squadron,
It's
yeah.
Our
368.
primary resources all have their logo patches. We have Bruce's, you've probably already seen. But the Clay Pigeons, the Fightin' Bitin',
That's
and
a
the
great
Green
name.
Reaper's got some really
Those
cool,
are great names.
really cool graphics.
Very cool.
Very cool. All right, we're going to keep going with this letter in his own words.
A few days ago, I visited Coventry, the town the Germans blitzed last year. Although a year has passed, the evidence of the terrific bombing is everywhere. Not a pleasant sight, and when I realize that my bombs are doing the same damage, I immediately dismiss it from my mind. Read today in Stars and Stripes where Michigan won a football game versus a Navy team, and it said Michigan had a dream team this year. If you see any of the games, Dad, let me know. I kind of like to hear about them. And how's Lowell's team getting on, and are they playing any night games? One thing that would get you over here, Dad, is the fact that the British drink all cold drinks at room temperature. Water is never cold. But surprisingly, as it may seem, I'm getting used to it and don't mind it a bit. It's funny how many things you used to figure as necessities are done without very nicely. I guess the war shows us a lot of things. Least of all is the realization of what a really wonderful country we have and how much higher our standard of living is than our neighboring countries. Then again, when a fellow starts thinking of home, he again realizes how much he has to be thankful for, perhaps more so in my case, because you are my parents.
Oh. So he mentions the city of Coventry and how badly it was bombed. So for some of our listeners, you have to remember, England was in the war several years, a couple of years, I think. Yeah, no more than that, before we entered the war. So they've been at it for a while. Dale, what do you know about the bombing of Coventry in the early part of the war?
Well, the air raid on Coventry on the night of November 14th, 1940 was the single most concentrated attack on a British city in the Second World War. It was a significant event because it demonstrated the destructive power of aerial warfare and became a symbol of the brutality of the Blitz against civilian populations. Codenamed Moonlight Sonata, the raid lasted for 11 hours and involved nearly 500 Luftwaffe bombers gathered from airfields all over occupied Europe. The Luftwaffe dropped 500 tons of highly explosives, 30,000 incendiaries, and 50 landmines. It was also trying out a new weapon, the exploding incendiary, where they exploded over and then they'd shoot and start fires all over the place. The smell and the heat of the burning city reached into the cockpits of the German bombers 6,000 feet above. The aim was to knock out Coventry as a major center for war production. It was said, too, that Hitler ordered the raid as revenge on an RAF attack on Munich. Coventry lost not only its great medieval church of St. Michael's, the only English cathedral to be destroyed in the Second World War, but its central library and market hall, hundreds of shops, public building, and the 6th century palace yard. More than 43,000 homes, just over half the city's housing stock, was damaged or destroyed in the raid. The fire at the city's Daimler Works was one of the biggest of the war in Britain. Up to 150 explosion bombs and 3,000 incendiaries turned 15 acres of the factory buildings into a raging inferno. King George VI is said to have wept as he stood at the ruins of the burned-out cathedral, surveying the destruction. The people of the city were traumatized. Hundreds wandered the streets in a daze, and little children were seen trying to burrow their way through solid brick walls to escape the terrifying noise. One man recalled being pursued down the street by a knee-high river of boiling butter from a nearby blazing dairy.
Wow.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah, the official death toll, it sounds terrible, but the death toll, I was kind of surprised at that. The death toll from the night was 554.
Wow.
But the real figure could have been much higher, with many people unaccounted for. The German attack on Coventry was also seen as a deliberate act of physiological warfare, aiming to demoralize the British population and undermine the resolve to continue war. The scale of destruction at Coventry demonstrated the effectiveness of area bombing, leading to shift the British air strategy towards area bombing rather than precision attacks on military targets. Following the raid, the Nazi propagandists coined a new word in German, Coventry, which meant to raise a city to the ground.
Oh, isn't that cool?
Yeah, by 1947, Coventry had adopted its first German twin city, Kiel. Dresden followed in 1956. The ruined cathedral now stands for international peace and reconciliation. Now, one other little turn everybody knows about, well, Enigma. Remember Enigma? How they broke the code? The German code?
Yeah.
Well, supposedly on November 12th, 1940, Winston Churchill was told about they broke the code that the Germans were a bombing raid was imminent. Its code name was Moonlight Sonata, so they already knew the code name. But they had no clue about where they were going to hit. They knew there was something coming on Moonlight Sonata. The intelligence said that they told him that they thought that the bombing was going to be London or areas around London, but actually they had captured a German pilot who was shot down on November 9th. And under interrogation, he told them that the cities were probably going to be Coventry or Birmingham. So because of the story is kind of get it that Churchill kind of knew, but he didn't want to give away
The idea that he knew.
that they knew how to break the code.
Right.
So that's kind of started with Coventry a little bit.
Wow.
So
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
that was in the
could've-
movie Churchill, I think. The idea that they knew the code, but they didn't want to.
They didn't want to.
So even though
If
So
they did that,
Coventry
then the
was
Germans
bombed.
would kind of know that they broke the code, and it would have been.
Yeah.
So
They would've-
that's
They could've
another little
saved
story
550
about
people.
Coventry underneath.
Whew.
yeah,
Yeah,
those
this is
kinds of
some-
decisions. Well,
Yeah, two interesting, great
Well,
stories.
he went to
today.
visit Coventry and kind of saw
They
the
could do that.
destruction. So, my goodness. All right. Well, we need to go on a lighter note here. The same part of the letter he mentions Michigan versus a Navy team, which is an Army. It was actually an Army cadet team called Camp Grant. And Michigan did win 26-0. And they did have a bit of a dream team because they were allowed to have naval cadets who were training in Ann Arbor join the team. So what happened was, like, all these college students left to go join the war. So, like, all these college football squads were depleted, and some of them didn't field a team in 1943. Michigan State did not, I learned. But then some colleges would have Navy training at the college, and the, I don't know, NCAA, whatever version of that was back then, said that if you were training at a school, you could play on their football team, even if you didn't go there, if you were in the Navy and training there. So what ended up was, apparently there's training in Ann Arbor, and a bunch of, like, college athletes from a bunch of places ended up training in Ann Arbor and deciding I'm going to go play on the football team. So it's kind of like Michigan had the college football all-stars at the time.
Oh, boy.
But the risk was they could be called to war at any point. So
Yeah.
so you could have, like, your star running back from another school all of a sudden join your school. It's like the NIL before transfer portal was a thing. But then they'd get called to war. But anyway, so Michigan did field a very strong team in 1943. So I always thought that was just really interesting. Like, what do you do when all your athletes are off in the war? Lowell was also playing night games at this time, too. So Bruce is interested. He's always asking about football, which I love, or baseball.
yeah, good research.
All right, let's finish this particular letter. We're still on the same letter. This is all in his own words.
As you sit in your chairs by the west windows, really seeing me in that direction, because even now I seem to be west of home, just remember, Bruce is out there. Perhaps he's flying now. Perhaps he's sitting in a London hotel lobby. Wherever he is, he's thinking of us, and he can even picture what we are doing. Though he's not here in body, he most certainly is here in mind. Soon we'll be together again, and this period will only be an occasional topic of conversation. Just keep believing this and know it will be a reality. When I come home, I'll be the same guy, with some reservations for the better, I hope. And if I decide after a period of time to get married, you'll probably have to take in the both of us. Either that, or we'll build that guest house on the back hill that you wanted, Dad. Speaking of back hills, how's the swimming pool coming along? Maybe you'll have it finished when I'm home again. Remember when Joe Reynolds fell in the pool at the house in town? Seems years ago. I guess it was about 8 or 10, wasn't it? I gotta realize I'm getting on in years. 29 by next spring. Oh well, there's plenty of time after that to think about getting old. Guess maybe this will be another lovely Christmas for you again this year, but we made it okay last year, so I guess we can do it again. I'll about give you my guarantee that I'll be with you on Christmas in 44. This letter has been a screwy one, more or less the things that have run through my head without trying to make them readable. Very soon, I'll write you a nice long one about London. There's plenty there to write about that isn't censored material. Guess I'll turn out the light and I'll get some sleep. I sleep very well here because the nights are quite cool. My love and prayers, your loving son, J. Bruce.
Yeah, this period will only be an occasional topic of conversation, like once a week. recorded and publicized out to the world.
Yeah. Well, he very rarely ever talked about it.
Just
was
occasional.
Yeah.
So did Frank and Lotta have a pool? Apparently they did, right?
They had a koi pond, a very small pond. Maybe they started out as a pool and they gave up real quickly.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know, but Joe Reynolds fell in the pool. So Joe would be his niece.
Yep. Well, that's,
It
yeah.
wasn't
Marion
much
and
bigger than
Ed's.
this table here.
Oh, you don't think? Okay.
I mean, the one I remember. So
We'll have to ask Annette and Cousin Mark and if what he remembers.
Yeah.
If he'd heard any stories about that.
Clearly, it must have been a funny story. I don't know. Maybe a traumatizing story. I don't know what it was, but.
Cousin Mark's family finally did do a pool up there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see.
Although
Yeah.
that's not there now.
The Ritzimas, right,
Yeah,
right. And they filled that in. Yep. I swam a lot of times in that pool with Ellen, Cousin Ellen. Yep, and Angela. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to introduce a new segment today where we reveal information that we know about Bruce's flight missions. So for this information, we can't use his letters. We have to consult flight records and mission diaries from the historical website of the 306 Bomb Group and all of its squadrons that Dale told us about. Bruce, of course, can't talk about his missions in his letters specifically, so we have to kind of match dates and look at this historical website, which is very well maintained with a lot of details. We may not find information on all 38 of Bruce's missions. Kind of depends on what this historical society has found, but we're going to share what we do know. And what we know, first of all, is that on September 27th, 1943, Bruce flew his first mission, we think. This is the first one that the historical group has, the earliest one that it's put up there. He was a co-pilot, with the main pilot being a guy named William Katz. And he apparently flies with William Katz a few times. But the goal of this mission was to bomb the German port city of Emden. So we're going to read some bits from the mission and combat diaries that kind of give narratives of how the mission goes. So these are not Bruce's words. These are the United States 8th Air Force words, I guess. They're the ones that write these. So first up is the combat diary entry from Emden.
Emden. This raid was highly significant as being our first attempt to beat overcast and smoke screen by bombing target unseen on Pathfinder navigation. Bombing was scattered as the Pathfinder's flares were first seen over the IP and no one was quite sure when to let go. The B-47s did their usual fine job. Lieutenant Joseph Belser led the squadron, which again flew low, followed by Lieutenants Paul F. Paulson, Reginald L. Robinson, and William Katz. All came home safely.
There you go. So there were more than just these planes that went on this mission, and not all of them came home safely though. That group did. There were P-47 fighter jets that escorted the B-17s, so they would often they would fly together. The mission reports by each individual pilot, though, show a little more detail and tell a slightly different story. Oh, go ahead, Dad. 18
aircraft took off at 0705. Crossed English coast at Cromer at 0856. The route followed was south of course on the way out and north of course on the way back. The enemy coast was crossed west of Radamarug at 10:01 hours. All ships bombed. 3 B-17s going down as follows. 10:03 hours, 1 B-17 down under control, vicinity Borkum. 10:13 hours, on the way out from target, 1 B-17 on fire, exploded. At least 2 and perhaps 3 shoots seen, one of which was on fire. At enemy coast, on the way out, 1 B-17 down under control. B-47 escort was excellent. Numerous dogfights observed. P-47s practically always on top with advantage of altitude of FWs coming up. FW-190s coming up to attack B-17s apparently mistook B-47s for friendly fighters and flew to join them. All landed at base at 12:41 hours.
Yeah, so this tells a story that actually 3 planes were shot down. Periodically, you'll see where they say, like, we saw this many shoots, which means the guys at least left the plane, so they could be missing. Sometimes they'll say no shoots observed, which I gathered meant they didn't make it. They died in the plane. And yes, we don't exactly know what happened to those pilots, but I don't know if you caught this, but I find it funny. The German planes are the FWs, the FW-190s. And they thought the P-47s were Germans and joined up with them. So they joined up with us. And like, hey, we'll join and the P-47s were like, oh, look, they're just right there for the taking.
Which I was like, wow.
Yeah, so that was interesting. So that's all we kind of have. I mean, they're these little tiny blurbs. We don't always have like a ton of information. Sometimes when they're bigger battles, bigger missions, I found that some of them have their own like Wikipedia pages and things like that we can get into more detail about. This one in particular, we just have these little blurbs. So every so often when we find these, like when we'll match the dates with the letters with the Historical Association from the 306 bomb group, and we'll see which ones have James B. McMahon in the mission report and, on the flight roster. And
we'll find out how much he's downplaying it to Frank and Lotta.
Oh, we're going to see he's downplaying it quite a bit. That's when I research some of these ones coming up. Yeah. It's insane. So we're just going to briefly run down some of these missions when they pop up in the timeline, and some episodes will have more than others and some might not have any, but we'll do what we can, because now that he's flying, we need to kind of get that story the best we can anyway. So thanks to all that Historical Society for capturing everything and saving all those documents. So that's it for us. Thank you for listening to Letters Home. We hope you continue to listen as we go through Bruce's story. You can listen to Letters Home on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the Lowell Historical Museum website and YouTube channel. New episodes drop every Thursday. The Lowell Historical Museum has digitized versions of Bruce's letters, so you can read them in full, along with primary sources for most of the people, places, and events we've talked about here today, plus more. You can also follow the Lowell Historical Museum on Facebook and the Letters Home podcast on Instagram at Letters Home Lowell. Thank you to Roger McNaughton for our podcast music, and to WW2 92.3 FM for letting us record in their studio at Lowell High School every week. Tune in or stream WRWW at lowellradio.org. See you next time.